Hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Doyle. I'm the CEO of Genius. I was the CEO of Genius Within.
You're
You're the
not.
CEO of Genius Within now. Sorry, I was that for 10 years, so it's a bit, I founded a company called Genius Within, and I'm also the co-director of the Centre for Neurodiversity Research at Work at Birkbeck University of London. And I'd like to start with a quote. Alexander Dan Heyer said, "When a flower does not bloom, we fix the environment, not the flower." And for me, that's what neurodiversity in business is all about. I've worked in disability inclusion since 1994 from a rather more humble background than Amanda's. I was a care worker for adults with learning disabilities, just as the care in the community stuff started getting going. And the themes and values of that movement have stuck with me my whole career. Namely, that we need a more inclusive society into which more people can join and thrive. After training as an occupational psychologist, I worked with long-term unemployed people and became familiar with the common tale that we've heard in so many talks today. Failure at school leads to failure at work. The individuals I worked with had many characteristics of value for an employer: creativity, loyalty, good humour, specialist skills. But those who had not been jacks of all trades at school were crushed by their lack of success. And this led to difficulties entering the workforce and maintaining employment. And they are disproportionately neurodivergent. As Amanda has said, this is true in unemployment and in the prisons and across the most marginalised in our society. The battles were always the same. Failure at interview, but would have been perfect for the job. In need of adjustments in sensory distraction reduction or literacy support, but too embarrassed to ask. And as I learned more about neurodiversity, I started to realise that time and time again, it was the same story. As a workplace assessor and coach, I was repeating myself, and I started to question why. If the problems are the same, why aren't we creating more flexible systems that allow a more diverse range of humans to come through the door? And I couldn't get a straight answer to this question. And so I've spent the last 15 years trying to find out why through my career and research. How can we change our systems to let more people participate? And a paradox has emerged for me, and that's one that I'd like to share with you. We keep talking about 15 to 20% of the population, and I think, therefore, it's more efficient to change our systems than to keep reacting one person at a time. The way it currently works is topsy-turvy, and I think it's time to flip the cost model of how we do neurodiversity. At the moment, everything starts with a diagnosis, and this is often the most expensive item on the menu of support. Good employers will pay for this service, but even with a seamless process, it can take weeks and sometimes months. And when following diagnosis, we often wind up with the same small adjustments, reducing those sensory distractions, providing dual screens, and fine-tuning performance strategies through specialist coaching. My research with hundreds of clients have often found that the thing that works best is very much things like flexible hours, the ability to choose their desk, ensuring that they take a lunch break, and these are free. So my challenge to workplaces is to make these things available to all employees, no matter their diagnosis. By offering flexibility and adjustments as standard, we can level the playing field for all, and we can conserve our resources for those who need it most. My research at the School of Organisational Psychology with my partner, Professor McDowell, is exploring ways we can enable human resource professionals and managers to be more confident at offering adjustments before people hit performance review and failure. In my coaching research, we found that the majority of our neurodivergent clients need help with memory, concentration, time, organisational skills, stress. Does this sound familiar to anyone in the room? But interestingly, this doesn't change with the diagnosis. It's the same profile, whether you're autistic, developmental language disorder, ADHD, whatever the issue, chronic illnesses, people who are going through the menopause, people who are in mental health distress. There are 1.3 billion disabled people worldwide, and these small proactive changes, which cost very little, add up to productivity gains across the whole business. And this is a flip from the reactive model where we don't start until people are already deep in distress. A typical trajectory story is the person who works hard to compensate and mask at work. They take work home, they stay late when it's quiet, they hide their difficulties, and this works until it doesn't. And then one day something changes. A new manager, a new workstation, a new bit of software, the wheels come off, the performance dives, and they lose rapport with their team, who are having to compensate, and then they hit performance review. At that point, they might ask for help, but by the time the help actually arrives, it's usually been months, and this damages their self-esteem, their reputation, their relationships immeasurably. The whole team becomes stressed and under pressure. No one is happy. So, where do we start? Well, we can borrow from the wider field of disability inclusion. We can use principles of universal design to create systemic inclusion in our workplaces. Universal design has gradually become more embedded in our society since the Disability Discrimination Act in 1995. You can see it in step-free access, in closed captioning, in voice-activated software. For invisible disabilities, universal design needs to be employed in HR and buildings to accommodate neurodivergent thinking. My most recent project evaluated the sensory experience of over 200 neurodivergent employees, cross-referencing their self-reports of overwhelm with different building design features. I have a PhD student, an autistic man called Ben Morris, who was non-verbal until the age of 11 and is now researching different barriers to recruitment and which methods work better, such as work sampling compared to interviews. Another of our neurodivergent PhD students, Jessica Dark, is researching the impact of disclosure at work and consent. What happens when you share your vulnerability, and what stereotypes might people make of you, and what does this do to your career options? Going into the gnarly details of what we're currently assuming to be best practice is one of the many things on our agenda. We have to remember, as has been said already, that 30 years of making adjustments is yet to move the dial on the disability employment gap, and there is clearly more for us to learn about what works. The strengths of neurodiversity in business have been talked about exponentially for the past 10 years, and it's now time to finesse what works. As an entrepreneur and neurodistinct person myself, I am interested in going where there is no path. However, as an academic, I'm interested in leaving a trail. It's vital for me that we bring together all of the knowledge of many years of making adjustments, one person at a time, one group at a time, and make it less label dependent and more about the dynamic future of work. Right now, with the skills shortage in full flow, there has simply never been a better time to fundamentally redesign the way we think about the workplace and our jobs. And research, as Atif pointed out, shows that this is a winning strategy. In general, diverse teams increase productivity and creativity. We need to work on the unconscious assumptions that we hold to unleash their potential, and we might start with awareness training, but we also need to unpick the structures that hold the status quo. We ask, what would you do differently for some applicants that you wouldn't do for others? Why segregate the process? Let's draw a straight line between the way we select and assess and work performance. And as an example, in Genius Within, when we're hiring for finance, we don't interview. We give someone a spreadsheet full of holes and ask them to find the holes and then say, what sense do you make of that? Because that's the job. And then if they give us that information verbally or in writing, we don't really care because we're measuring the actual task that relates to the job at hand. This kind of proactive approach, critically, costs less than running a dual process and reacting one problem at a time. This is not to say there's no role for diagnosis and no need to disclose. On the contrary, many people, including myself, have found diagnosis cathartic and vindicating. For me personally, it enabled me to stop criticising myself for things I couldn't control and instead looking for strategies and adjustment. It offered a way out of self-reproach and an alternative to being accused of moral character deficits, laziness, poor motivation. And this has wide-reaching psychological benefits for our workers, for people entering the workplace and people leaving the prison system. We must remember that diagnosis is privilege, which Atif alluded to. And so my hope is that by flipping the cost model, there will be fewer people in need, and those that do come will be in a less desperate state by the time they arrive. Through universal design, we can truly embrace Judy Singer's original meaning of neurodiversity, namely that our varied cognitive skills are essential to the success of our species, as biodiversity is to the planet. Neuroinclusion is a moral, social and economic imperative, and we all lose when human potential is squandered.